Fire and Hell. A Satana prose feature adapted by Gerry Conway from his original script. Prologue. Moonlight reflected, shattered, reformed. The surface of the swimming pool was like the surface of a diamond, revealing unsuspected motion beneath. For the span of a heartbeat, the black cat paused at the edge of the pool and gazed at its reflection in the ripples, as though seeing its image for the first time. A pink tongue appeared between white teeth. Gray eyes widened. The cat seemed to smile at itself, almost a diabolical smile, full of mysterious intent. Then the gray eyes closed, the cat yawned and stretched, and with a shrug that was just short of human, it turned and padded toward the garden wall. At the base of the wall, it paused to study the apartment windows just beyond the masonry. There were 3 stories set in a rectangle around the swimming pool, an arrangement typical of garden apartment complexes in Southern California. The window directly above the black cat was lit, and figures moved back and forth in silhouette behind the curtain. 3 figures, all male. The cat shook its head and padded on. It passed 2 more windows and stopped before the 3rd. The window here was dark, but the spotlight which illuminated the small back area was on. Someone was sitting behind the wall, in the tiny court reserved for the use of the apartment's tenants. The cat sat back on its haunches and listened. And when it was satisfied with what it heard, it gathered itself and sprang. One leap carried it the 5 feet to the top of the wall separating the private garden from the swimming pool court. The cat landed lightly and peered at the woman sitting in the garden with faintly luminous eyes. Her hair was so red it was almost fire, and her eyes were feline and as gray as the cat's. Her face was classic in its beauty, feminine yet austere, sensual yet cold, hard yet somehow soft. Her eyebrows were arched, even in relaxation, and she was relaxed now, reclining in a garden chair and reading from a popular paperback novel. She chuckled softly as she read, and smiled now and then when she turned a page. Her fingers were long and slender, the fingers of a pianist perhaps, though the nails were much too long for a working musician's hands. And though the night was cool, she wore an outfit that was barely decent. A black leotard with several swaths cut from its cloth to reveal her pale white skin. She did wear shoes, but they were strange. Unwieldy fur boots that rose almost to her calves, with bits of bone and other trinkets attached to the fur rim like ornaments. All in all, she was painfully Californian. Eccentric just to the point of absurdity, but of course, not quite. Shadow among shadows. The cat dropped into the private court and moved to the woman's side. Absently, her hand came down and the cat pressed its head against the woman's palm. It purred. She stroked. After a moment, she said, without looking up from her book,
"Any news? Have you had word from my father?"
Under her hand, the cat shook its blunt head.
"Nothing, mistress,"
it said, in a voice that seemed to pulse from within its throat.
"The netherworld is closed. The 4 have sealed us off completely."
The cat shivered and pressed upward for reassurance.
"What shall we do, mistress?"
"Do, Exeter?"
The woman looked up from her book and gazed thoughtfully across the small court.
"I promise you, I shall think of something."
As she spoke, she rose to her feet, hearing a sound from the outer garden. She went to the garden wall and stood watching as a car parked in the driveway at the far end of the apartment rectangle, where the buildings parted to reveal the street. A young man left the car and locked the door behind him. Straightening, he became clearly visible in the light from the spots set over the driveway for safety purposes. He was wearing an Army surplus jacket, trim Army regulation trousers, and heavy black regulation shoes. As the young man came up the driveway, the woman returned to her chair. She was smiling. The cat looked up at her expectantly.
Perhaps it will involve that young man.
The woman said softly.
Yes, I think it will.
She nodded and ran her hand along the cat's back. The cat arched and purred with satisfaction. Abruptly, the woman stopped her petting and rose to her feet once more.
But first, there are other matters to be attended to,
she said, and grinned down at the cat, an expression that was more bestial than it should have been.
Most important matters,
the woman added. She moved toward the gate which led out of the court.
Matters of the soul.
The gate swung shut behind her. One. Henry Hank Johnson, full-time field representative of the Oregon Manufacturing Company, covering the Southern California area, and part-time wife cheater for the same district, decided for the 1,000th time that the singles bar he'd wandered into on Sunset Boulevard was just too damn crowded for him to get any action. He'd been pushed and shoved. He'd spilled his drink twice. He was beginning to lose his hearing from the music blasting around him, and he was already nauseous from the dense smog of tobacco smoke surrounding him. An evening which had started out promising had turned into a full-scale disaster, and Henry Hank Johnson had had enough. After all, he wasn't a young man anymore. Pushing 40, partially bald, overweight, and underdeveloped, Henry Hank Johnson was beginning to realize that hustling a date in Los Angeles wasn't as easy as he'd been led to believe. In San Diego, or Santa Barbara, or even San Jose, that was getting too far north, matters would be different. There were always bored wives or lonely widows in the bars in those towns. LA, however, was another story. Los Angeles was a teenager's town, or so it seemed to Johnson. And all the time he'd been stalking the streets, he hadn't seen a single girl over 18 years of age. There'd been a time when he could have handled a girl that young. There hadn't been really, but there was in Henry's memory. But not anymore. Life had passed him by. At least it had in Los Angeles. He was about to finish off his drink and leave, when a hand touched his shoulder, and he turned automatically. He almost dropped his glass. He was facing the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, and she was smiling at him.
I've been watching you,
she said, and miraculously, her voice managed to be gentle in spite of the deafening noise.
You seemed lonely. Would you like to go for a walk?
Henry Hank Johnson didn't question his good fortune. His mind didn't wonder where the girl had come from or why she'd chosen him. He didn't marvel at her strange cat-like eyes or her odd fiery hair or the bizarre black costume in which she'd pressed up against him. Like an automaton, he placed his drink on the bar counter, got off his stool, and followed her as she wove through the crowd between the bar and the exit. Her hand on his was cool, but incredibly thrilling. Her shoulders, seen from behind, moved liquidly, unbelievably sensually. Henry Hank Johnson couldn't take his eyes off her. Henry Hank Johnson felt as though he were about to faint. He was grateful when they stepped into the night air, and he took a bracing lungful of the Los Angeles pollution.
Is your hotel near here?
She asked. He nodded.
Which way?
She asked. He pointed.
Do you want to walk?
She asked. He shrugged.
I'm glad.
Henry walked beside her, his arm around her shoulder, and it seemed to him he was seeing and hearing the world for the first time. Everything was transformed. The traffic on Sunset Boulevard, the bitter wind carrying his thin hair out of his eyes, the concrete under his feet. It was all new to him, all new and all wonderful. He grinned and started whistling. Hey, he was really something, wasn't he? He glanced at the woman beside him as though to make sure she was real. She was. She smiled back at him, and after a few moments, as they were passing a small alley, she said,
Let's stop here a while, all right? I'd like to get to know you better.
Eagerly, he followed her into the darkness. She moved around, so his back was against one of the buildings forming the alley's wall, and she slipped up close against him. Henry Hank Johnson groaned involuntarily. She put her hands behind his neck and looked into his eyes.
Kiss me,
she said, voice almost a whisper. Trembling with anticipation, Henry complied. 2 seconds later, he tried to scream. It all went very quickly. The skin on his face dried and collapsed in wrinkles and folds. The flesh on his bones seemed to wither and flake. And in 10 seconds, Henry Hank Johnson was reduced from a man to a desiccated corpse that really resembled nothing remotely human. The woman rose up from what had once been Henry Johnson's face, and between her teeth, she held a small, squirming butterfly. She removed it with her fingers and let it flutter away. Watching it go, she said, partly to it and partly to herself,
I feed on creatures like you, my friend. I feed on your cynicism, your lust. I steal your souls.
She pulled herself erect, and her laughter filled the alley and spilled into the street.
Truly, Satana is a stealer of souls, what men have called a succubus. But it's fitting, isn't it?
She laughed again.
Fitting work for Satan's brood, the devil's daughter.
After a while, the laughter faded, and when it was gone, Satana was gone also. Two.
Dinner will be ready in a few more minutes. Are you hungry, Satana, or do I eat alone?
Gloria Hefford looked up from the stove in the kitchen of the garden apartment and frowned when she realized that the other woman hadn't been listening. Satana was standing at the window overlooking the rear of the apartment, gazing down at the swimming pool below. Gloria repeated her question, and Satana started and glanced around.
Not very,
Satana said.
I had a snack only a little while ago.
She paused and returned her attention to the window. After a moment, she called out,
Gloria, would you come over here a moment? I'm wondering if you know someone.
With a sigh, Gloria wiped her hands on a towel and went over to stand by the tall redhead. Gloria was an attractive woman in her late 20s, clad in black as though in mourning.
I know almost everyone in this complex,
she said.
And they all know me. Gloria Hefford, Girl Scout for Satan. Well, that's probably what they used to call me. And Ruth too, of course, when our backs were turned. Who is it you want to know?
That man, down by the pool?
Satana said, pointing.
I saw him earlier in the evening. He was wearing an army uniform.
Oh, you mean Rich Corbett. He's a friend of those college kids in apartment 3G.
Gloria leaned forward to peer past Satana's shoulder. Down below, in the light of a spot set to illuminate the pool, a tall young man with short-cropped brown hair was removing a terry cloth bathrobe. He was wearing a bathing suit under it.
That's Corbett, all right. From what I hear, he's not bad for a gung-ho America type. I've been thinking about converting him to Satanism. Ruth was certain we could, before she died.
Satana nodded. Gloria's dead roommate had had an uncanny way of dealing with people, and it was this which had attracted Satana to Ruth when Satana first arrived in Los Angeles. Unfortunately, Ruth Cummins' empathy had ultimately caused her death, a fact which Satana had been regretting for weeks. Naturally, neither Ruth nor Gloria knew Satana's true identity. They thought her merely another member of the ever-growing Satan cult, one of their own, so to speak. She was, of course, much more.
Interesting,
Satana said, finally.
He could be just the man I need.
Need?
Asked Gloria.
An army freak?
She shook her head.
You know, every once in a while, I realize how little I know about you. That cat, for instance.
On a chair across the room, Exeter looked up, his eyes blinking.
One day he just shows up,
Gloria went on.
and the two of you hit it off as though you've been friends for years. You're like that with people, too. Where'd you get that cat anyways?
Satana smiled.
Exeter?
She put out a hand. The cat bounded from its chair and slid into her arms.
He and I have been friends for years. Almost as many years as I've been alive.
Pressing his head against her chin, Exeter purred, but his eyes remained opaque. 3. On the second knock, the door opened, and the man who Gloria had identified as Rich Corbett appeared in the entrance, clad only in a towel.
Well,
He said, after a slight hesitation.
hello.
The redhead, with the strange cat-like eyes, returned the greeting, and added,
I was hoping I'd find you in, Mr. Corbett. I've something of a problem I'd like to discuss with you. I live down the hall.
She indicated a direction, and the sleeve of the semi-transparent robe she was wearing fell back.
Perhaps you've seen me. My name is Satana.
Corbett drew himself up and looked around, apparently disoriented.
Ah, yes. Please.
He said finally.
Won't you come in?
He stepped back to allow her room to pass, but somehow he didn't step back far enough, and her body brushed his briefly. She was dressed in a bikini bathing suit beneath her filmy robe, yet didn't seem self-conscious. She stood just inside the door and examined the apartment, listening for the sound of other voices. Hearing none, she turned back to Corbett, who was closing the door, distracted.
Listen,
He said,
if you'll wait in the living room, I'll just put some clothes on. I was out swimming and I was cleaning up in the shower when you knocked, and I don't have anything.
I know.
the woman said. Her body drifted near him.
That's why I came here. Because I saw you.
Her hands touched his, moved towards his waist. Lifting herself up on her toes, she placed her lips close to his. Corbett seemed startled for a moment. Then resistance drained out of him, almost as though it were being pulled from him physically. He kissed her. The kiss went on for a very long time. "4.
You come on strong, lady.
Corbett said an hour later. He handed her the drink he'd made to her specifications, careful not to spill it on his neatly pressed trousers. He went on as he picked up his own drink from the portable bar near the living room sofa.
And that's the understatement of the year.
I've learned how to get what I want, Rich.
Satana said between sips of her drink.
And I want you. Your full and total cooperation.
Corbett laughed as he settled onto the couch beside the redhead.
You've got it, honey. What's the game?
He stretched out and smiled at her lazily.
Who do I have to kill? Or is it whom?
His name is Miles Gorney. He's the president of Consolidated Electronics.
Corbett sputtered and doused himself with whiskey and ice.
What? Say, listen, sweetheart.
He pulled himself out of his slouch and gaped at the woman next to him.
I was just kidding. That was just, a figure of speech.
I, however, am not kidding.
The redhead said.
I can't tell you why he has to die. Only that he must, if I'm ever to see my father again.
Let me get this straight. You come in here, you play this little love game with me, get me on your side, and then you tell me you want me to kill someone for you?
Corbett inhaled heavily.
Lady, are you crazy?
Moving with the sultry grace she'd employed for the past hour, Satana eased toward the young army officer and placed her hand against his shoulder.
I assure you, Rich Corbett, I am not insane. I simply know how to get what I want.
Her eyes went hard as she moved in on him. He met her without resistance.
And I want Miles Gorney dead.
"5. Gloria's face was barely visible in the light of the candle on the table beside her. Flickering, the candle dipped and almost went out as the outside door opened and closed, and a gust of night air entered the room. Satana came with the wind, her eyebrow raising when she saw Gloria sitting cross-legged on the floor, a book propped on her lap,
It's about time you showed up.
her eyes riveted on the other woman.
Do you know what time it is?
Gloria said, her tone just slightly hot with anger. Instantly, Satana cut the woman off.
I'm not responsible to you, Gloria. If you think I am, then we'll have to make some new arrangement.
No.
Gloria said quickly. All anger went out of her face. She seemed to cast around and said at last,
It's just that some of your friends called a few minutes ago and woke me. It's after 4 in the morning and I was just...
Friends of mine?
Satana asked sharply.
That's what they said.
Gloria replied defensively.
Weird bunch if you ask me.
Getting to her feet, she trailed behind Satana as the redhead went into the bedroom. Gloria sat down on her bed and watched as Satana undressed. Satana moved slowly, thoughtfully. Gloria said after a moment,
They reminded me of the ministers I knew when I still went to church. All stiff and holier than thou.
Gloria leaned forward.
Say, is that a birthmark on your throat? Ruth had something like it on her shoulder. A small bat like that. Silly. 2 things almost the same.
I know.
Satana said. Her hand came up to her neck and caressed the mark, almost tenderly.
It's just a coincidence. Nothing more.
If you say so,
Gloria replied. She seemed about to say something further, but apparently thought better of it. Climbing under her blankets, she shut off the light beside her on the second-hand night table she shared with Satana. Satana sat in the darkness a while before removing the last of her clothing and climbing under her own covers. She thought once more about Ruth Cummins, and her thoughts weren't happy ones. It was true Ruth had also borne Satan's mark, but whereas Satana's birthmark had indicated she was the devil's own daughter, Ruth's had indicated only that she would one day do Satan's work. Satan's work had proven to be fatal for the young, innocent girl, whose only desire in life had been to know truth. She died to save Satana's physical life, and because she'd acted unselfishly and without so-called sin, Ruth had gone, not to Satan's embrace, but to the embrace of that other one. Satana shivered at the thought, and shivering, she forced herself to sleep. Six. Suddenly she was awake, and it was an hour before dawn.
Those friends Gloria mentioned.
Satana thought.
I must be a fool.
She swung to her feet and padded naked through the apartment, to a corner of the living room where none of the false dawn light had penetrated.
No doubt they were agents of the Four.
Satana went on mentally.
The mystic cabal which wove the spell that keeps me from my father. They must have cast another such spell to allay my suspicions, and they have succeeded well.
On her knees, she used a piece of chalk she'd taken from a desk near the window, and with quick, efficient strokes, she outlined a pentagram on the bare wood floor. It was necessary to have such a device when dealing with the Four, she'd found. Otherwise, too much of her energy was wasted in combating the Four's confusing influence over her powers.
First, I must conjure that scene which I have viewed before, the meeting of the agents of the Four upon the earth, the gathering at which my father and I were split apart, seemingly forever.
She rose and uttered a brief incantation. Her hands wove a pattern in the air, and gradually a column of smoke appeared, directly over the center of the pentagram. She remained within the 5-sided device and stared into the column, waiting for the images to form, which she knew so well.
Whatever reason they may have had for coming here tonight, that reason will be plain when I've seen what I must. Wait. It begins.
Within the smoke, a picture was forming. 4 men in robes so white they were blinding, gathered on the 4 points of a cross painted on a floor, each man holding out his right hand. A column of smoke similar to that conjured by Satana rising from the center of the cross in the floor. The men were speaking, chanting actually. Satana could recite the words from memory, and did so under her breath.
By the points of good, let us pray. Let the gods relive the evil in our world. Let them tear asunder the unnatural relations, separate father from unholy daughter, Satan from Satana, demon from demoness. Hear our prayer, heed our prayer. Have this unnatural union, Send daughter to mother, and let there be grief ne'ermore.
Satana's expression was cold and full of hatred as she listened to the chant, and when it was over, she spat into the smoke in contempt. But she made no move to dissolve the image. Instead, she listened more intently than before as the men lowered their hoods and peered at their own column of smoke. A bright line appeared in their column, a pillar of glowing gold. When it appeared, the men grinned and laughed with joy.
"The gods hear us, brothers,"
said one man, a middle-aged man with gray hair and a black mustache under a heavy nose.
"Look, as their power joins our own, soon that which we have planned on behalf of the Four will come to pass. Satan's agent on earth will be cast adrift. The succubus will exist no more."
As the middle-aged man's speech ended, the golden pillar flared brilliantly, streamers of light shooting out like lightning from the central column. Crying out, the men shielded their eyes from the glare. At last, the glow died, and another of the robed men lowered his arm and peered at the smoke, and shouted,
"Miles, no! Something's missing from the spell. The Four demand a further sacrifice, some additional witness to our obedience."
Satana pursed her lips and arched her already arching eyebrow. Within the smoke, the men waited patiently as an image formed inside their own conjured column. White swelled into focus against the gray of the mystic smoke, and within the white several spots of black appeared. An outline formed, and the four men were staring at a life-sized human skull. Above the eyes was the star of a bullet hole. The men gasped and muttered among themselves when they saw the skull, and the second man who'd spoken said, in agony,
"Oh gods, no! It's too great a price to pay! Too heavy a duty to demand!"
A third man cried,
"Please, we pray to you. Let this cup pass from us. You know our loyalty. Ask anything else, and it is yours."
The first man, who'd been gazing at the skull with an expression of determination, said firmly,
"That's enough, John. If the Four demand this, then Miles Gorney at least is willing to give it to them. Let the spell continue. They can collect their due when the deed is done."
Again, they began to chant, this time in voices tinged with weariness and sorrow. Satana didn't listen to this reprise of the earlier chant. With a wave of her slender hand, she caused the smoke column to collapse and vanish. This done, she stepped from the protection of the pentagram and stood musing in the center of the living room, her arms folded beneath her naked breasts. Her foot tapped the floor impatiently. The scene was as she remembered it, but on some level, it had subtly changed. Or was it her perception which had changed? When she'd first conjured the vision, she'd been enraged at the audacity of these men who'd exiled her from hell. And so she may have seen only what she wanted to see, and heard only what she wanted to hear. And because it seemed to her that Miles Gorney was the man who had single-handedly forced the spell through, she wanted to destroy him for revenge. For revenge and, she'd thought, to keep him from giving the Four their final sacrifice, whatever it might be. With a wail of anguish, she realized what she'd done. Seven. First Lieutenant Richard M. Corbett wasn't a particularly moral man. And by his way of thinking, it wasn't too great an ethical jump from killing and Nam to assassinating corporate presidents in Los Angeles. One was merely an extension of the other, and in point of fact, he really had a better reason for shooting Miles Gorney than he'd had for shooting any of the 100-odd he'd killed in the jungles of the DMZ. If he killed Gorney, whom he'd never seen before, and certainly didn't care about one way or the other, he would be assuring himself a place in that gorgeous redhead's heart. And wasn't that a hell of a lot more important than winning a few medals from Uncle Sam? Hell, he'd only gone into the ROTC program in the first place because he thought he'd be drafted, and he'd hated the idea of being a bum in boot camp. All things considered, Corbett was pretty much assured he was doing the right thing. Or as close to the right thing as he cared to come. Not to put too fine a point to it, Richard M. Corbett was really quite insane. At the moment, however, he'd put all questions of morals and ethics aside, and was concentrating primarily on the job at hand. Sitting on the roof opposite the office building where Gorney had his offices, Corbett glanced up at the sun and then down at the M16 in his hands. He'd taken the gun apart and cleaned it during the hour he'd been waiting in the pre-dawn stillness, and he'd loaded it and checked the action and lined up the shot he'd expected he'd make. A straight-line sniper shot from the roof of the 6-story building to the lobby doors across the street. It was the proverbial piece of pie. He'd have absolutely no trouble making the shot. None at all. Something caught his attention on the street below. He swung around and went flat onto his stomach and edged up to the vantage point he'd chosen when he first arrived. From here, he could see the entire street. A car was pulling up in front of Gorney's building. There were other cars moving up and down the street as people arrived for the day's work, but some sixth sense told Corbett that this was the car. He put the M16 up and sighted. The telescopic attachment jumped the scene below toward him, and he smiled when he saw the men stepping out of the car and rising up into the morning sunlight. 4 men, and one of them was exactly the man Satana had described. Corbett aimed, began to ease his finger back on the trigger, and cried out as his gun fired and a booted foot kicked his wrist and sent him flying.
Rich, don't! Don't!
He stared up at the woman standing over him, breathing hard as though she'd been running. She was wearing a black outfit, some sort of leotard, and at first he didn't recognize her. When he did, he exploded with anger.
What in the hell did you do that for? You almost shattered my wrist.
I'm sorry, Richard.
Satana said.
I couldn't let you, go through with it.
This is one hell of a time to start getting second.
Corbett broke off when he saw the expression on her face. She was looking down at the street, and her mouth was working, her eyes blinking back tears, her forehead wrinkling with what appeared to be grief. He pushed himself up and peered over the edge of the roof to see what was upsetting her. On the sidewalk across the street, a crowd was gathering around the 4 men who'd left the car a moment earlier. One of the men was lying on the concrete. It was Gorney, Rich saw. Gorney, lying in a pool of his own blood, his head shattered from the bullet which had entered his skull through his forehead, just above his eyes.
What's wrong?
The young man asked, turning back to the redhead.
I thought you...
Fool,
she hissed, and suddenly he saw the feral rage burning behind her mask of humanity.
You killed him.
But you said...
He sputtered, helpless, as she advanced on him. He couldn't understand what was happening. Everything had crumbled. It had all gone sour somehow. He felt a sick terror as he began to realize that this woman was more than she'd seemed. Much, much more.
He wanted to die,
Satana whispered.
They needed a martyr to make the spell work. They needed a human sacrifice, and you gave it to them.
I did what you asked.
He stuttered.
I did what you...
But she was on him, kissing him. At first he thought she'd forgiven him, that it had all been a crazy misunderstanding. She was kidding him, that was all. And then the burning began within him, and he knew that she hadn't forgiven him, that he'd been a pawn in a game he hadn't even been aware of playing, and that the pawn was forfeit. The game was lost. His last thought as he died was that he'd been safer in the jungles of Nam. She rose when it was over, and released the butterfly which was his soul, and looked at what was left of him, and slowly, sadly, smiled.
I know you did what I asked, Richard,
the woman in black said softly.
But you have to understand this doesn't matter now. Gorney is dead, the spell is sealed, and I am trapped on this dustball world.
She put her hands to her face, and kept them there until a black cat appeared on the roof and padded to her side. She looked down then and said,
He was the nearest mortal on whom I could release my anger, and in my moment of rage...
She shrugged and indicated his corpse.
Oh, in a way, I'm sorry,
she told the cat. The cat looked at her cynically.
But the sorrow isn't lasting,
she added. The cat purred. Together, they walked across the roof, away from the death behind them. The sorrow comes, the sorrow goes. At best, it's a fleeting thing for this woman named Satana, who is, after all, the devil's daughter. You have been listening to A Fire in Hell, a Satana story written by Gerry Conway. This story originally appeared in Haunt of Horror No. 2, published by Marvel in 1974. Narration by Matt Howell. Satana was played by Athena Howell. Rich Corbett was played by Jacob Balcom. Gloria Hefford was played by Mia Sarah Kemple. Miles Gorney was played by David Goodwin. Cult member number 2 was played by Jason Finestone. Cult member number 3 was played by MJ. The cult chant was performed by Jason Farrell, Jason Finestone, Jesse McFerrin, Glenn Lash, and Letty. Thanks for your voices. Original music by the Homeless and Orphaned Werewolves League, and available to the Bronze Age Monsters Pack members and Star Gods through our Patreon page. We thank you for your support. You can find the beginning of Satana's story on our YouTube page. Satana's story continues in Bloody is the Path to Hell and This Side of Hell, which will be Patreon-exclusive videos. She'll also appear in an audio drama during the next season of Bronze Age Monsters in Doorway to Dark Destiny by Chris Claremont. Become a supporter of the show at patreon.com/bronzeagemonsters. Stay bronze, Pony Boy. Stay bronze.